Hi everyone, welcome to episode 3 of the Bharat Varta podcast. So this is a commentary on politics, policy and culture focused on India. And this episode, we're going to be talking about Uttar Pradesh. It's the largest state in India. We have about 200 million people living in that state. And in many ways, UP's growth kind of mirrors India's growth as well, right? So this episode, we're going to be specifically looking at three elements of Uttar Pradesh. One is the law and order. Second would be healthcare, and third would be public infrastructure. And we're going to cover recent developments in the last 3 years and its significance in India's context today. So with me, I have Ashish, Harsh, and Rohit as usual. Hi guys, how's it going?
Hi, Roshan.
Okay.
Hello, hi.
So we're going to start with Harsh. Harsh, you have a very interesting, perspective on why we should focus on UP, right? So why we should talk about UP. Do you want to share that to begin the episode?
Yes, thank you, Roshan, so much. So Uttar Pradesh is about 8% of India's land area, so 1/12 approximately. It has 1/6 of India's population. And economy-wise, again, it's about 1/12. So it's about half of India's per capita income. But double the density, right? Because it's twice the population compared to the land. So twice the density of India on average and half of the per capita income. Now, historically, if this area has been very populated, that means historically this area was doing well economically, right? Otherwise, there's no reason for human habitation to coalesce there. And the reason was this is some of the most fertile territory on planet Earth. And India in general actually has about as much arable area as the US, which is 3 times larger, slightly less than the US. So India has the largest arable area to total area proportion in the world amongst major countries. And the Ganga River, which flows right through UP, was navigable or used extensively for navigation till about 100 years ago. And then what happened was the railways were built by the British and a lot of canals were cut out of the Ganga for more and more irrigation. And slowly it basically fell into disuse. So the commercial centers became Calcutta and Bombay, and then after a few decades, extensively towards more West India and South India. So UP and to some extent Bihar, it's roughly the same story. Till about the early 19th century, 20% of the population was in some kind of manufacturing. It's kind of difficult to believe 200 years ago we had a larger percentage of UP population in manufacturing than today. So the UP's fall is very much the fall of India, and UP's rise will very much be the rise of India. So this historically in most parts of the world with such density, either you are very very poor like we are in UP, Bihar, or in Bangladesh outside of India, or and on the flip side is when you do well, you do extremely well because a unit of infrastructure goes much further here than in say Western China or Western United States, because you just get much more bang for the buck for physical infrastructure, for social infrastructure. Of course, the downside is in times like these, here some pandemic can also spread more closely. So that's the downside of density. So Uttar Pradesh is right now at a very kind of, it's such a cliche to say, it's such an inflection point. We have a new government for the last 3 years, and we'll discuss this in the podcast. But if with some infrastructure, physical, social, this blob of human mass can suddenly become a headwind for the Indian story, from a headwind for the Indian story to a tailwind. So that's how I would set the overall context, and I'm happy to go into much more detail as time permits on each of these parts. But basically, it's got half the per capita income of India, twice the density. Historically, the river was navigable, the main river there, therefore it was very commercial, including manufacturing and export hub. Right now, it's none of that above, right? It's in Western India and South India, and East India in turn complains about freight equalization in the 60s and 70s, which led to industrialization not happening here despite all the raw materials being here, although they themselves forget the communist and socialist policies and unionist policies that led to that. So it's a mixed story. But either way, North India, the core of the Indian heartland, UP and Bihar, especially UP, has been basically a big, one of the losers of the last few decades of the Indian economic growth story, and this might be about to change, and therefore it's very important to discuss it.
Interesting. So, I think, I mean, as you also mentioned, right, briefly touched upon, I think it's also been let down by a succession of governments that, basically cared for nothing else other than to retain power. Rohit, you want to add some more context on this?
Yeah. So I think one of the big issues that happened with UP and fair few of the states that have sort of lagged behind post-independence really was the quality of governance right after independence. In the sense that UP started off pretty well actually with a stable government under Pandit Pant, who was a very senior leader and who sort of controlled the UP Congress like a lot of other strong leaders controlled their respective states. But as soon as he went to the center, things started sort of falling apart in UP. And of course, UP was the political base of the Nehru-Gandhi family. So that in itself meant that, especially from the time of Indira Gandhi, no one really strong could emerge in UP. And that led to a fair bit of political instability. Another thing which I think a lot of people sort of miss out on in talking about UP is UP was one state where the Congress faced opposition from two different groups of people who both remain strong for a very long time. That's the socialists as well as the Jan Sangh, or what is today the BJP, basically the Hindutva forces. And what this meant was it was always in a bit of a political muddle because there were three groups competing for power, and while the Congress obviously was much stronger and hence could win majority in certain good elections, there was a general sense of instability. This further increased when the BSP became strong in the 90s, etc. And the 90s, I think, is when UP really fell behind actually. Not saying that that's because of the BSP becoming strong, that's not true. But what happened in the 90s was as economic liberalization came in, UP was actually at its most unstable phase ever. And that really meant it could not take advantage of some of the benefits of economic liberalization the way your southern states or your western states could. And that phase of instability lasted for a long time. You could say from 1989 till almost 2004. 2004 when the Samajwadi Party, sort of broke the BSP and formed a single party government. The state was broadly unstable. You had your one-day chief minister in Jagdambika Pal. You had a succession of various alliances. Even the BJP changed chief ministers many times. And that sort of ended with 2004. Then you had your SP government, which brought in some sort of stability. And you've actually seen stable governments for the last 15 years, which has actually sort of culminated in the current government under Yogi Adityanath, where certain issues that plagued even efficient SP and BSP governments of the past, like law and order especially, are also being tackled. That's where I think we can go into some more detail on what may be the reasons why there's an inflection point now.
Okay. So we're going to take law and order to begin with, right? I mean, UP historically has been the hotbed of criminal activity in so many ways, whether it's Muzaffarnagar or whether it's the fabled dacoit gangs and so on, right? Or if it's petty crime and so on. So Ashish, you want to jump in and give some context and maybe talk about what's changing at the moment?
Yeah, sure, Roshan. So see, law and order itself has got three different components, right? So one is the law and order in the cities, which are the hub of economic activity. This is where when states do not do very well and there's a lot of people around milling around in the cities, it gives rise to gangs. It leads to it leads to extortionist type behavior, which we have seen in UP and Bihar. So that is one part of it. The second is the more broader law and order situation in terms of national security, where certain parts of the country can become hubs of either terror activities or foreign funded elements, etc. And the third is more occasional law and order situations like riots, which happen because of some of these forces coming together, including economic backwardness and the general tension in the society. I think UP had all three of those issues in the last few years. They've been simmering at various levels. As Rohit mentioned, the benefit of economic liberalization was never really fully realized by UP, like the way Karnataka or Gujarat or Maharashtra probably catched in, even Tamil Nadu and AP and North Telangana. So I think these states had a much better run because they basically attracted a lot of new investments since 1991, and I think law and order, getting law and order in control was one of the major factors for these states. In UP, the things kind of went reverse in all three directions. I think what has changed really is for example, on the three dimensions of law and order which I mentioned, I think that the new government has been trying at least to control. Actually it has worked on all three dimensions, but very importantly, the day-to-day law and order, which is essentially keeping your the centers of economic activity functioning. I think that is very critical because people need to have a stable view of how their daily lives are. That is when the industries come in or the small businesses start to grow, or that is when people invest in new ventures, etc. So I think that has been very critical. Of course, the national security part is a major issue, which it's not just about the state governments, but it also needs a lot of investment of time and effort from the central government. But I think this has worked. The dimension of the state and the center working together has worked well in the last few years in UP, since I would say 2013-14, even the latter part of the SP government, and now the Yogi government. So I think this part has improved, and hopefully it will reflect in the economic situation too in the years to come.
Okay, so I'll jump in, Carrie, if that's fine. So this is Harsh here. I just listening to Ashish and Rohit, I remembered a couple of things which I had forgotten to mention in the introduction. And Rohit is absolutely right that UP missed out on liberalization's benefits. So Praveen Chakravarti of the Congress Party, before the 2019 elections, he wrote a couple of papers with Vivek Deheji and other people, and the big marketing theme out of that was amongst the large states, the three poorest states are 3 times poorer than the 3 richest states. So agree or disagree with the man on something else, but that was roughly a good summary, that the 3 large states, the richest ones, places like Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, approximately 3 times richer than places like UP, Rajasthan or Bihar. Rajasthan is now doing better, for example. So that's one. But I think that I forgot to mention one of the reasons for this, and I personally do not believe in the governance reason that much. I think that's as much an effect of the economic downturn as it is a cause. Is that once again I mentioned the infrastructure part which we will discuss, and the Ganga being navigable. You have to remember that the Chinese population centers, for historical river estuary reasons, are all along the coast as well. Right? The Indian population centers are not at the coast. UP and Bihar are by far the most densely populated. We are away from the sea in these 2 states. And one of the reasons the southern and western states took off, there are other reasons as well. Demographic, governance, yes, also is a part, is that they literally, because India's hard infrastructure deficit was so high, that states which were close to the sea literally had a better time going to JNPT or Visakhapatnam port or Chennai or even Haldia to some extent in Calcutta. And UP and Bihar literally had no outlet. So as some people might know, till about the 70s and 80s, even parts of eastern UP and Bihar, northern Bihar, not just Jharkhand, were industrialized. I know that there were Marwari families from Calcutta who had factories there. So whether it was a lack of infrastructure which led to less economic viability, which led to these political issues, or vice versa, or both, it's a very kind of complicated issue to untangle. But I'm just saying that it's the governance issue is not necessarily unidirectional. So I'll pause there for now.
Yeah. So again, agreeing with Harsh and Ashish on some of the historical issues as well as law and order. I think one aspect of law and order that one needs to appreciate here is the kind of criminality, or you could say random acts of illegal behavior that is generally done by local politicians. In the sense that, and this is especially prevalent under certain political regimes, especially the SP for one, where basically every MLA is sort of treated as a local king, and everyone in the entire law and order system is supposed to just deal with whatever the MLA says. Now, this is actually different even under the BSP, but under the Yogi government again, but the BSP has its own issues. But under the Yogi government again, one has gone back to this thing where you can actually, no one has a license to rule their area as a king just because they're an MLA or an MP. Now, this obviously causes a lot of anger in the BJP ranks itself, but that's something that the BJP can actually handle a lot more than the SP, because it's again some sort of an ideological party and also a party that is sort of driven by the popularity of the Prime Minister, and even the Chief Minister in this case has his own some sort of a personal popularity, so he's just a lot less dependent on these Bahubalis, which allows for, because a lot of these law and order issues are actually caused due to political backing, and that's something that has really reduced over the last 3 years.
So, just wanted to add one more point from what Rohit said. See, one of the manifestations of this control of law and order is look at how the exams, the board exams run in UP, right? Just this week we had a news that almost 5 lakh students did not appear for the exams because they feared that the controls and the vigilance during the exams will be very high. I mean, UP exams have been notorious for cheating and so on, where external people have been helping students write exams. So even something as basic as that, which was one of the focus areas even during the earlier regimes of Rajnath Singh or Kalyan Singh, that's been brought back now in the system. So I think that those are the small controls which really can rejuvenate local economies and local animal spirits.
Yeah, okay. So in 2017, you had the horrible, Gorakhpur hospital deaths, where about 63 children died because of a lack of oxygen supply, right? And historically as well, I mean, healthcare has been a concern in Uttar Pradesh. So what has changed specifically over the last 3 years, and what is what has really happened on the ground?
So the 2017 Gorakhpur tragedy, where thousands of kids died through the year because of Japanese encephalitis and acute encephalitis syndrome, that caused a big furor. It certainly was a governance failure, but then the way it was reported in media, etc., it kind of got a communal color as well. The problem has existed for several years. It's not a new issue. These diseases are prevalent in the region for many years. In fact, when Prime Minister Modi had visited Japan for the first time after assuming office in 2014, one of the meetings Indian delegations had done then was with some expert doctors who had done research around Japanese encephalitis. So it's been on the radar for a while. In fact, when CM Yogi Adityanath was a member of parliament, he had raised these issues himself in the parliament in 2007-8 time frame. But it kind of all got amplified in a big way in 2017, and I think that probably put the governance in action. In the last couple of years, the incidents, incidents are there, but the deaths have reduced significantly. And one of the reasons is that the immunization program which the government is running through the region in the eastern UP region and in the Gorakhpur region, I think that has really helped control both the outbreak of the disease as well as the treatment of kids who eventually do suffer from these diseases. A lot of it is also linked to things like cleanliness and a larger awareness around some of these issues, some of the health issues. So as the hard infra gets developed, people move around, they understand, they have got better access to hospitals even outside of the region. The awareness goes up, especially around immunization, because unfortunately in India also we now today see a lobby of anti-vaxxers, partly religious reasons, partly just lack of knowledge around vaccination. So some of those issues are being tackled fairly efficiently by the government, by the Yogi government. And I think that's a good sign that at least one of the major healthcare issues has been addressed in the last few years.
Anything around Ayushman Bharat, how that's impacting, secondary healthcare and so on? And this is open to Rohit or Harsh. Anyone can comment.
Yeah, so, Carrie, I think Ayushman Bharat as we all know, is a slightly recent scheme, which is the idea behind it is basically to sort of voucherize hospitals, in the sense that the government basically pays private hospitals to give some of the benefits of their treatment to people who would otherwise not be able to afford private hospitals. However, at this point, I'm not very sure how much of it is actually, strongly implemented in UP, or whether we can really develop any outcomes based analysis on it so soon, because it's hardly been more than a year since this actually got rolled out and became active even in UP.
Okay. Anyone else with any other comments on healthcare, or we can move on to infrastructure after that?
Twin parameters on the infant mortality rate and the maternal mortality rate, right? So I think, we don't have a very recent survey data in this case, but between 2006 and 2017, UP has also improved significantly on the IMR part of the evaluation. That's down from 2006 to 41 in 2017, and hopefully in the years to come it will improve further. This data is published by the Sample Registration Survey Bulletin, which comes out every few years. So the more recent data is not available currently for 2018-19, but we should get that in the next year, in this year. The maternal mortality rate, unfortunately, has worsened in UP. Some of it is also base effect because the Uttarakhand data was segregated and so on. But I think some of the while there's cheer on one side, there's some work to be done on the other side.
So let's talk about infrastructure in this segment of the podcast. Harsh, you want to talk about recent developments that have happened and why you are optimistic and hopeful for the future?
Thank you once again. Yes, absolutely. So infrastructure, hard infrastructure, if we are speaking about right now, since we've already covered education and health, has multiple components, right? It's got roadways, it's got railways, it's got urban transport like metro, and it's got airways, airports. So I'll begin first on the road side. So road side also has two components. One is classic expressways and highways. One is Grameen roads under the Pradhan Mantri Grameen Sadak Yojana, PMGSY. So the first proper expressway in India was the Mumbai-Pune Expressway, right? Built by Gadkari almost 20 years ago. And right now, what we are seeing in Uttar Pradesh is nothing short of absolutely fantastic. It's difficult for me to have anticipated this 3 years ago. So we already had this, Noida to Agra road, the so-called the Yamuna Expressway, already built in the previous government, and the Agra-Lucknow Expressway was also almost complete. But we now have 3 or 4 more new expressways which are already in the process of being built or land acquired for. So the Bundelkhand Expressway is for southeastern UP. The Prime Minister recently inaugurated that. That's about, I don't know the exact length, 300, 400 kilometers. You have one so-called Ganga Expressway which runs right across the Ganga. That is in the process of being acquired land for. So they had some environmental reasons to delay it because they wanted some extra distance between the riverbed and the highway. We have the Purvanchal Expressway, which goes from Lucknow to eastern UP, which I think is going to be the most consequential amongst these highways because it goes through some of the most densely populated as well as the poorest parts of the UP. And from Purvanchal, I think we have 2 links. We have one link from Purvanchal which goes to Gorakhpur, which is northeastern UP and also the home district of the Chief Minister. And from the Ganga Expressway, one part will end up in Balia, which is the extreme most end of Uttar Pradesh and barely 1,500 kilometers away from Patna. So what this does is it allows economies of scale, like classic Adam Smithian economies of scale, for any manufacturer to reduce the logistics cost, for people to move around here and there. So you have to remember the entire density of Uttar Pradesh is about 1,000 people per square kilometer right now. It's around 820 in 2011. So it's a bit less than 1,000 right now. And eastern UP is even more densely populated. So in parts of northern eastern UP, it's almost 2,000 people per square kilometer. Despite that, the official urbanization rate of UP is around 20%. For India, it's around 30%. And a lot of experts will agree that actually the urbanization rate of India substantially underestimates the true urbanization in India because we have very weird ways of counting urbanization. It has to be more than 5,000 people in a town. So many should not be doing agricultural work, and this and that should be municipal government, so on and so forth. But the relevant point here is you build this infrastructure, you build other infra, you already have 3G, 4G coming in, and effectively large villages are cities now. Whether you call them that, whether you give them governance like that or not, so they're already cities. And these kind of expressways are not even there in Maharashtra, which is much more industrialized, or Gujarat. And many of them will be completed around 2022, 2023. So I'll stop here briefly, let Ashish and others come in on the metro and the airline and the railroad part, but I'll just quickly, and as well as the waterway, which is an interesting component. But the railroad part is also interesting because so there are two DFCs being built in India, right? Dedicated freight corridors. One is Western, one is Eastern. The Western goes from around Delhi to Bombay, roughly, and the Eastern goes from around Punjab to Calcutta. So therefore the Eastern one goes all through UP. And so now you'll suddenly, in 3-4 years, this should, by the way, end by December 2022 latest now. So you'll have proper expressway, global standard. You'll have a dedicated freight train corridor. And as we'll discuss, you'll also have a waterway. So the logistics cost for a factory to be located in UP will be significantly lower in 3-4 years from now than it is now, or it was 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah, so I'll just add to what Harsh mentioned. See, one of the issues which we know why some of the states in the north did not develop as much as those in the south and the west, and I think Harsh alluded to that earlier, was the whole freight equalization policy, right? Where the states with the ports had a much better access to the markets. So these roads, roads are one part of it. UP is developing about 2,300 kilometers of expressway. And the good thing is that there's a continuity from a governance standpoint here, because many of them were actually envisaged during the BSP regime. Some of them got implemented between BSP and SP regimes, and then some of the work is happening between SP and BJP regimes. Plus, of course, the Yogi government has completely ramped up the process of construction with especially with the Purvanchal Expressway, which is almost 350 kilometers, and then trying to fast track the Ganga Expressway work as well, which is more than 1,000 kilometers. So I think this connectivity will really help the industries in UP to really access foreign markets. I think one lesser discussed aspect is on the waterways. So National Waterway 1, which essentially connects Varanasi to Haldia, I think this has been a very interesting development in the last few years. I mean, the Shipping Minister Nitin Gadkari had started, or rather laid the foundation of constructing a terminal in Varanasi and in Haldia around 2016, and we've already had some shipping activity on this route in starting 2018. So the first trial on this National Waterway 1, which works on River Ganga, this happened in 2018 when one of the container cargo belonging to PepsiCo that sailed from Haldia to Varanasi. The first trial run actually happened with some Maruti cars being shipped from in the other direction from Varanasi to Haldia. But the PepsiCo one was the first commercial run, a large commercial run. There have been some interesting examples as well, already successes as well. So like Maersk, which is one of the biggest shipping logistics company, it transported green chilies from the Varanasi area to Dubai, to UAE in about 9 days earlier this year. So in this particular example, chilies were shipped from the Jaunpur Varanasi region on waterway to Haldia, from where it was put in appropriate reefer containers, which is like the refrigerated containers, and then using fairly high technological intervention around remote management of temperature and so on, these containers were shipped to the Dubai port. So I think some of these examples, I mean, of course, there's a long way to go, but it shows that the potential is there. In fact, I remember of an example which which I saw on Twitter from Anish Gokhale, who is an author. He had written about how in 1667 there used to be like 32,000 boats floating on Brahmaputra in the Mughal times. I mean, someone from the Mughal Empire had chronicled this. Now, 350 years later, we are still struggling to operationalize NW1 and NW2, which is on Brahmaputra. So I think this whole initiative has to scale up. It opens up not just the not just UP but also northeastern states, and very importantly connectivity with and through Bangladesh for India's own northeastern population. So waterways is essentially one of the big developments. On the railways as well, Harsh mentioned about the DFC. Hopefully, both the western and the eastern corridors should be done by 2022. The eastern corridor has some way to go because of land acquisition reasons, but the work has been in full swing, especially after Mr. Piyush Goyal took over as the railways minister. Here again, the state, I mean, there have been a lot of other interventions around introducing higher speed rails to promote tourism, etc. in Agra, which is also very critical. The Vande Bharat Express was trialed on the Delhi-Varanasi route as well. So connectivity on rail, road and water has really picked up. The other aspect, which is on the airport side, again, Jewar will be one of the largest airports in the country. Actually, the largest airport in the country. And the good thing is that right from the start, there is foreign expertise being tapped into. Zurich Airport is going to run the consortium which builds and runs the airport. Also, it's not just Jewar, but it's also if you look at the flight operations from say Agra, Gorakhpur airports, there are many more flights than what used to be just 2-3 years ago. Prayagraj has opened up as part of the Udan scheme. So Prayagraj is being connected to several cities, which benefits not just the UP, the people of UP, but also people of MP, because the corresponding part of MP on the northeastern side is one of the most underdeveloped region of the state. So the Prayagraj airport connectivity actually helps the districts of Satna, Rewa, etc. as well. And also Hindon, which is in Ghaziabad, been traditionally a military base. So a couple of civilian flights have been started from that airport as well. So I think overall, all the dimensions of connectivity are being taken care of and addressed. I think this, in the last 2-3 years, I would say this has been one of the biggest successes in the whole governance system of UP.
Harsh, you want to extend that point about Jewar Airport and the connectivity from Agra, Gorakhpur, and so on?
Yeah, sure. I think the excellent points that Ashish added on the physical infra side. So let's start on the metro side for a moment. So we've covered rail, road, waterway, and airports. We can jump back again on that. But not just this amazing stuff, but there are not only is the Lucknow metro already functional, there is work going on Kanpur metro, on Agra metro, on Banaras metro. Well, Banaras might get a metro light, it seems. And there are all these regional rapid transport systems, like for example, Delhi to Meerut, where work is going on. So if you imagine this conventional railway network that we had, basically from British colonial times, which we just added a very little to in the future decades. Now we have a DFC, we have these HSR high-speed trains, kind of seater trains that Ashish mentioned. We have these 4 or 5 metro projects. We have these RRTS, these regional rapid transport systems. And what you can see is we can extrapolate that to beyond even 2023, 2024, more towards 2030. You'll have a very dense railway network for both freight and passengers, and almost world class, where you can travel from one part of UP to another, at least from city to city within trains in a comfortable way, without necessarily having to take a bus, which also will be running on a good expressway, except the very final distance. And why this is important is, for example, if you extend this HSRs all the way from Delhi to Calcutta and Delhi to Bombay, as we are working via Ahmedabad in the case of Delhi to Mumbai, you suddenly have a competition to airplanes for a limited demographic, because now some people can sleep overnight and travel from one major metro of India to another, and therefore in the process save money for one hotel night either way. So the more the better as far as customers and citizens are concerned, and the kind of productivity boost it can lead to is difficult to imagine unless we think of what China has done in the last 20 years, right? China has obviously it's another level altogether. They have a very dense bullet train network, not even semi-high-speed train network, covering entirely their eastern half. which has led to the massive GDP growth along with other infra and industrial reasons there. So I think overall, if you look at physical infrastructure, you could not have asked more for a poor state. And quite frankly, richer states ought to be a bit jealous of this right now.
Interesting. So one thing I also want to touch upon is public sanitation, right? I mean, it's been in the focus. What with the coronavirus outbreak and stuff. How is UP specifically equipped to handle this? And Rohit, do you want to add, what the government has been doing on that front?
See, I think UP again is obviously the heart of some of these public sanitation initiatives, because a large portion of the problems that the Prime Minister had identified when he started this whole Swachh Bharat program actually came from was relevant to UP itself. And to that extent, what has been done, especially after the Yogi government took over, because obviously the Samajwadi Party government was not very interested in sort of working on something which is very clearly a pet project of the Prime Minister. There have been a lot of work done in building these toilets, etc., across UP. And this really needs to be linked to the whole point Ashish had mentioned on Japanese encephalitis, which is basically a communicable disease. And the reason why it was so prevalent in the particular part of UP that is your northeastern belt around Nepal, was due to the very dense population there, as well as the lack of effective sanitation, etc. So to that extent, things have really improved in UP right now.
Sorry, Harsh had a point about the Gorakhpur light metro, so I'm just going to allow him to come back on that. Yeah, go ahead, Harsh.
No, I was just mentioning more broadly that there are so many projects that you end up forgetting. So the Gorakhpur light metro is being worked on, as well as the Noida and Greater Noida metro is quite a massive project just by itself. The problem is it ends up being counted as part of Delhi NCR as a metro project, and the two are now connected. But there will be a connection from Jewar Airport as well to the existing Delhi Airport, which is in southwest Delhi, as well as be connected and interconnected with the Noida and Greater Noida Airport. So I don't know if you've traveled from the Hong Kong airport to downtown. These kind of airport expresses are not necessarily there in most cities of the world. Forget India. This is, I think, the idea about India, especially the cow belt, so to speak, being bad on physical infrastructure, could be really outdated in 3 to 4 years. So Gorakhpur, by the way, will have a light metro. I think the government tried to push for a conventional metro, but it did not turn out to be economically viable per se. So they'll have a light metro.
Okay, fantastic. So we've covered in depth, a few of these points on law and order, infrastructure, healthcare, and so on. Right. What I want to end on is your wish list from the UP government. So we'll start with Ashish. Ashish, what are 2 or 3 things that you would like the UP government to do in the next maybe couple of years?
So I'll speak about 2 things. The first one is on the tourism side. I think India has generally underexploited the potential of tourism as an industry. See, if you look at the benefit of tourism as an economic activity is that it creates jobs in situ, in the place where tourism exists, right? So this creates local jobs. The migration gets controlled, and very importantly, it creates jobs, fair bit of continuum of skill sets. So there would also be lower end jobs, and then depending on how a given place develops, there could be fairly high upper end service jobs as well. So a whole range of jobs can be introduced in a given region with successful tourism initiatives. Now, the thing with UP is there's so much history there. I mean, when we talk about tourism, you essentially talk about Agra or Varanasi largely, but there's so much history, right, for which is there for like 3,000-4,000 years. Areas like Kannauj, for example, which once ruled India, but there's hardly any talk of any great historic tourism in that region, for example. So I would I really wish that the government's focus on in tapping the full potential of tourism, develop different types of circuits which might interest different types of audiences. And I mean, of course, connectivity is a very critical part. I think what tourism really needs is connectivity, law and order, a general sense of cleanliness people can visit, and then of course the chain of hospitality industry and so on, right? So maybe this part is missing today, but I think that is something which the government can focus on, apart from the fact that you have to restore what exists. Some of the heritage which is there has to be restored. I mean, I think that's a big gap today in the Indian governance system, because the bodies like ASI are too focused on a few cities or a few types of heritage restoration. So I think that could be one big area in my view. The second part is not necessarily for UP itself, but I would take a broader view here. See, some of the, if you really look at the map of India, the eastern part of Rajasthan, bulk of northern MP, and the eastern part of the western part of UP. On the southern side, I think this region has got several poor districts, like what Niti Aayog today calls aspirational districts, right? I think the highways which UP is building can actually benefit not just the state. I mean the expressways which UP is building can benefit not just the state but also the region itself. So just as an example, if you look at the Bundelkhand expressway, right? That can also benefit the Bundelkhand part of MP if MP government was to plug into it. I mean, the expressway is like literally 150 kilometers from Bhind, which is one of the poor regions in the northern part of MP. Similarly, the Yamuna expressway is not very far from several points in Rajasthan or northern MP. So if we can actually create a more broad-based network of expressways across Rajasthan, MP and UP, that could actually kickstart completely untapped local economy as well, with ease of people moving. It can create jobs not just in UP but also in MP and Rajasthan, which I mean, between those three states plus Bihar, tend to remain amongst the poorer states in the country. So I think what UP has done can really be leveraged by other states as well if some thought goes into it.
Yeah, very important point. I think especially about tourism and so on. If you go anywhere at all in US, Europe, I mean, one thing you realize is how very well they kind of maintain their monuments and historical structures, and how they create like this whole thriving economy around it, right? And if you travel at all in India, I mean, that's the one obvious low-hanging fruit that kind of hits you, which is, hey, I mean, there is so much of history and tradition here, and it lies in shambles, right? So anyway, moving on, Harsh, do you want to come in with your wish list for the UP government? What are the 2 or 3 things that you would like?
Yeah, I have actually just one wish on the list. Shouldn't be too ambitious. But before that, I would like to say that I told you other states will end up being jealous, and therefore Ashish was plugging Madhya Pradesh to get these expressways. It is just a matter of time. See, my wish list for UP is one very simple. See, Yogi has done, I would say, I mean, a fairly reasonable, good job in 3 years. But one nut, if he can crack, he can truly end up on the greatest ever CM shortlist, which is if he can somehow crack urban. So if the Uttar Pradesh government can somehow crack urban governance. So I had mentioned earlier that, officially urbanization in the UP is probably in the 20 something. In India, it's in the 30% something. But actually, in terms of global definitions of urbanization, in terms of population densities in one geographical area, we are actually around half in India overall, if not more. And in large parts of UP, Bihar, and Kerala, it's close to 100%. Kerala, they've actually kind of now already redefined many of those areas as urban areas, whereas in UP and Bihar, it has not happened. So what does it mean to be an urban area? There's some taxes which come in terms of property taxes. You end up getting some less stuff from the government in terms of NREGA and so on and so forth. So if he can negotiate, the UP government led by Yogi Adityanath can negotiate with the central government as well as the local governments for some kind of rational gradual transition plan, where it would actually be sensible for the local stakeholders to want to declare themselves an urban area, that could dramatically end up increasing the quality of living which in turn would feed into Ashish's point about tourism being attraction. I mean, tourism is not just about heritage, right? Tourism is about a woman being comfortable wearing short skirts, walking around a town and feeling safe from a law and order point of view, right? I mean, just not having a care in the world. So a lot of Indians actually spend their hard-earned money going to Europe just to feel that way. So urban governance in India, in all of India, is broken. But here we have a very strong government with a good track record. How can they incentivize the finances so that local bodies would actually want to transition themselves from panchayats to a nagarpalika, and therefore all the benefits that come around with, and further to get that I think is a difficult nut to crack, but that will actually have the biggest difference in quality of living, tourism aside, also for the people who actually live there. So that's my wish list.
Yeah, that's a great point. So we're on to Rohit. Rohit, what is your wish list for the UP government?
Yeah, I think all these expressways, airports, etc., they have fairly broad coverage in the majority of the state, but I think there's a part of the state that is sort of not covered by it. And what I'm talking about is basically what is called, the greater part of the Awadh region. That's the areas to the that comprise most of the Lucknow and Faizabad divisions of the state. That is your Hardoi, Sitapur, Lakhimpur, Gonda, Bahraich districts. These are again some of the most poorest districts of UP. A lot of these districts actually come under the Ghagra basin. So that's probably why some of these things which are based on the Yamuna Expressway, Ganga Expressway, etc., don't really cover it. Roughly the area between Bareilly and Gorakhpur. So that is something I think which is where some more additional work may need to be done on the infrastructure side, because the infrastructure in these areas is also pretty poor as on date, at least when I last visited this area around 1 year back.
Okay. So, guys, this was awesome. So I think we did a deep dive on plenty of things here, and hopefully this is insightful and useful to everyone who's listening to this. So this was the third episode of the Bharat Varta podcast, where we delved into Uttar Pradesh and tried to focus on a few elements around healthcare, law and order, and public infrastructure. Hope you found this useful. We have another one coming out next week. If you have thoughts on what we should cover specifically around politics, policy, or culture, please feel free to engage with our Twitter handle. That's at Bharat Varta. The links on Anchor, Spotify, and the other channels will be out soon. Hopefully on YouTube as well this time. And hope to catch you soon. Thank you.